Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak, your podcast available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 29th of July here in London. I'm Caroline Hepke.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Israel hits back at Hezbollah after 12 children die in a rocket attack on the occupied Golan Heights.
Kamala Harris raises $200 million in a week as Republicans look to sharpen their attacks.
Plus, Rachel Reeves accuses the Conservative government of covering up the true state of the UK's public finances, but Bloomberg and others warned of the shortfall before the election. So can Labour really claim to be surprised?
Well, let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Israel has struck Hezbollah targets in Lebanon and threatened further retaliation after a rocket strike killed 12 young people in the occupied Golan Heights. The Iran-backed militant group denies responsibility, but US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says evidence suggests the rocket came from Hezbollah.
We are deeply saddened by the loss of life that we saw. There is no justification for terrorism, period. And every indication is that indeed the rockets were the rocket was from Hezbollah. We stand by Israel's right to defend its citizens from terrorist attacks.
Blinken's comments, made while on a trip to Japan, come as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to exact a heavy price from Hezbollah. The latest escalation coincides with renewed efforts to secure a ceasefire with Hamas. Over the weekend, the head of Israel's Mossad spy agency met the head of the CIA, the Qatari Prime Minister and the Egyptian intelligence chief to discuss the latest iteration of a Gaza truce proposal. Negotiations are set to continue in the coming days.
Turkey's President Erdogan has suggested that the country could intervene on behalf of Palestinians, possibly with military support. Speaking in his hometown, the Turkish leader said, "We must be very strong so that Israel can't do these things to Palestine." While he spoke vaguely and made no indication that he was considering any direct military operations, his remarks underscore the growing hostility towards Israel. In recent months, Erdogan has recalled Turkey's ambassador to Israel, suspended trade with the country and sent humanitarian aid to Gaza.
Kamala Harris has raised more than $200 million during her first week as a 2024 presidential contender. The Vice President has also seen a 10% increase in her favourability during the same period, according to an ABC News poll, putting her ahead of rival Donald Trump. But Republican Governor Chris Sununu says the support won't last.
I mean, this is the honeymoon period. They had, the courage to push him off the ballot. Vice President Harris is in there. The media is fawning. Everyone's excited. It's a whole new race. That's all very true, and that's going to last for about 30 days. There's no question. I think the Democrats can take that momentum into the convention.
Governor Sununu there speaking to ABC News. Harris received a key endorsement from former President Barack Obama last week, and her campaign says 2/3 of their fundraising tally came from first-time donors. Donald Trump's fundraising has also surged in recent months, bolstered by support from Wall Street and corporate executives drawn to his economic agenda.
Now to corporate news. Apple is delaying the release of its upcoming artificial intelligence features. Instead, the company is employing an unconventional strategy for its rollout. Bloomberg's Doug Krisner has the details.
The arrival will happen in October, roughly a month later than anticipated, and the delay will give Apple more time to fix bugs. We are told the rollout of Apple Intelligence will be a part of software updates, originally scheduled for September. Now, in spite of the delayed release, Apple Intelligence will be available to software developers for the first time for early testing as soon as this week. That strategy is atypical, but the stakes are higher than usual. Apple needs support from developers to ensure a smooth consumer release of its big bet on AI. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
While delays at Apple come amidst a challenging time for the technology sector, concerns are growing that AI and data center spending will decelerate unless companies can generate significant revenue from those investments. Investors soured on the promise of returns from tech last week, sparking a $1 trillion rout in the Nasdaq 100.
In the UK, Chancellor Rachel Reeves is expected to highlight a bleak fiscal inheritance in her first major speech since taking the job. Reeves is due to say she's inherited a near £20 billion shortfall for public services and warned Bloomberg of difficult decisions to come. James Woolcock has more.
A roughly £20 billion fiscal hole with a dilemma between harsh spending cuts and tough tax rises. It's a grim diagnosis of the UK economy. But independent think tanks, Bloomberg's own economists, and even the Office for Budget Responsibility have been warning of this looming fiscal crisis since the start of the year. So the question the Chancellor faces is how much of her audit has found new skeletons in the cupboard. And if her speech later today does turn up new horrors, how can Labour achieve their goals for government without making a U-turn on their tax pledges? In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
6 former Conservative government ministers are now running to replace Rishi Sunak as the leader of the party. The former business secretary and the bookmaker's favourite, Kemi Badenoch, is the latest to declare, with nominations closing this afternoon. Conservative John Glenn says that the priority must be to unite the party.
You need somebody who can have the right analysis of the defeat, put the party on the right footing going forward. But obviously, the individual needs to be somebody who the country can believe is a credible candidate to be Prime Minister in 4 to 5 years' time.
John Glenn speaking there. Conservative MPs now in opposition will now narrow the field down to 4 candidates by the end of September in time for the party's annual conference. A final shortlist of 2 will then be put forward to the party membership with the new leader announced in November. Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the rising tensions between Israel and Hezbollah, plus discuss Kamala Harris's massive fundraising in the US presidential race. But first, a thought on the first weekend of the Paris Olympics.
I think I've just recovered from the opening ceremony, to be honest. I mean, all 4 hours of it.
It was wild, wasn't it?
But I mean, so much has been said about it already.
Yes.
I thought it was fantastic. I thought the element of jeopardy at every single corner.
Yes.
Will anyone fall in the river? Nobody did. But I mean,
they all got drenched.
Indeed. And the next big question also revolves around the river, because they've cancelled a second day of training in the Seine for the triathletes that were going to their swimming portion of that. The event is tomorrow. Will the water quality have improved in time for the swimming event to actually take place?
Look, everyone's cheering on Paris. And of course, I watched actually a lot more of the sport than I had expected over the weekend, including Adam Peaty. He came in first in the qualifying, then he missed out on the gold. Oh, that was so difficult. GB, of course, is on 2 silver, 2 bronze medals, and we're 13th in the table, at least so far. So fingers crossed then for GB.
Plenty to keep us busy over the next couple of weeks. Let's turn now to the latest events in the Middle East, where Israel is threatening further retaliation against Hezbollah for a rocket strike that killed 12 young people. Our Middle East economics and government editor Paul Wallace is with us for more. Paul, good morning. Can you talk us through how Israel has retaliated so far and what more it could do?
Hi, Stephen. Israel so far has threatened substantial action, and one of its ministers even said the action would be disproportionate, suggesting a heavy strike against Hezbollah, and perhaps even something like Israel targeting civilian infrastructure in Lebanon. However, there was relatively little that happened overnight. No major counterstrikes from Israel. And it seems as if so far Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to give the ceasefire talks regarding Gaza a bit more of a chance. They sort of resumed yesterday in Rome, and while there weren't any major breakthroughs, it does seem as if Israel just wants to give those a little bit more time to run. We're still unclear, and it's possible that Israel still could respond in a massive way, but the early signals are that it doesn't want to do something that would be tantamount to starting an all-out war with Hezbollah and or Lebanon.
Yeah, I mean, the concern around how serious the risk of escalation is there. I mean, both sides in Lebanon and Israel have talked about that all-out war being devastating to both countries, potentially. There has been a reaction in markets to the worries, though, but you say that there is less concern maybe around the escalation, or at least some pause, perhaps?
There's still a huge amount of uncertainty, and I think it seems clear that Israel is keeping its options open. As far as markets are concerned, we saw quite a drop with Israeli stocks yesterday. At one point, they were down 3%. I think they ended the day down just over 2%. We'll see what happens with the shekel today when it resumes trading. I think what's important to note, though, is that markets have been far more concerned in recent months about the prospect of a full-on Hezbollah-Israel war than they have done with what's going on in Gaza. I think markets realize that a war with Hezbollah is an altogether different thing for Israel and the region than a war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. It would be more devastating, as you've mentioned, officials on both sides saying Hamas is arguably the most powerful militarily the most powerful non-state actor in the world, and almost certainly the region. So that is something that would seriously unnerve markets if the two sides went into a full-on conflict, and it's the type of thing that could cause oil prices to jump, at least in the short term.
Yeah, indeed, that the issue with Hezbollah, something that is worrying markets significantly. Paul, you mentioned the talks there that are going on over the ceasefire with in Gaza. I mean, is this a sign of significant progress? Should we expect more progress to come in that?
The Israelis are signaling that yes, there should be progress of some sort over the coming week. However, as you and I think most of the listeners well know, we've been here before. These talks over a ceasefire and the release of all, or at least some, hostages held in Gaza have been dragging on for months. And of course, the two sides, Israel and Hamas, have never managed to get over the line. There's still big sticking points. Israel is making it absolutely clear that whatever ceasefire is agreed to, if one is agreed to, it won't be the end of the war, that Israel must still have the option to resume fighting if it chooses to, because it says it's still intent on destroying Hamas as a military and governing entity in the Gaza Strip. There's also the sense, I think, and this is slightly different in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's a sense in Israel that the military pressure it's putting on Hamas with its attacks in Gaza are really, really pushing the Islamist group toward accepting a deal of some kind, essentially that this military pressure on Hamas is working. That's at least Israel's point of view. If you look at the likes of the US and of course Arab states and Israel's allies in Europe, they want a ceasefire immediately. As you know, as Vice President Kamala Harris said last week, she wants the war to be over. But Israel is still saying that it wants total victory. It's certainly open to a ceasefire, but not one that will be seen as a weak deal, especially by far-rightists in the country.
Paul, okay, thank you so much for being with us. Bloomberg's Middle East economics and government editor, Paul Wallace.
To US politics now, and Kamala Harris has raised $200 million in her first week as the presumptive Democratic nominee for November's election. Our Bloomberg TV anchor Kriti Gupta is with us for more on the political story in the US. Kriti, can you put these numbers in context for us? How big is this fundraising drive? How does it compare to what Donald Trump's taking in?
Yeah, so $200 million is where we're at here. And this is really important because 66% of that $200 million has come from first-time donors. And this is a really big deal because one of the big reasons for Kamala Harris to even have this focus on campaign pushing in the first place is that a lot of the pool of money that was really set aside for the Biden campaign and really raised through the Democratic National Party was meant to be kind of something inherited by Kamala Harris. So for her to say that actually more than even half of that new money is coming from first-time donors really shows that this isn't really an inheritance story. This is actually more of kind of broadening support, not just among the Democratic Party, but among independents as well. This is something that's being reflected in the poll numbers as well. I think that's as well very significant because her numbers have skyrocketed from 35% of an approval rating up to 43% to the latest ABC poll. Now, I want to just kind of caution with that there is a honeymoon phase that a lot of political strategists are talking about. She's very exciting. She's very new. She's doing fun things on TikTok and media and all of that kind of more not I'm trying to see, more cater to a younger crowd, I think is the way to say it. Yes, jazzy. Let's call it that. And that is showing up in the numbers. She's also talking about some very interesting VP picks. All of these things are showing up in the numbers, but they may not last. I think that's the key part. Yeah, but then how's the Trump campaign then playing it? I mean, obviously emphasising a point like that, I imagine. Yeah, they really are. And they're saying, I mean, there's some criticism, of course, coming from the likes of J.D. Vance, some criticism like talking about childless mothers. Of course, Kamala Harris is a stepmother to 2 children, but doesn't have any children of her own. So that is a criticism that's being used in the MAGA camp and playing among a domestic audience and really talking about bringing up issues like her views on abortion or her views on gun control and things like that. So that's a one of the ways that this is being tackled. The other is coming from President Trump himself, really saying that, look, she's not going to be appealing to a broader crowd. And he's actually taking a different approach and appealing to actually a Bitcoin crowd. I know that sounds like 2 different things, but the reason it's so significant is simply because the idea is who gets kind of the bigger numbers, who gets massive. She's appealing to the female vote. And if she's appealing to kind of the minority vote, perhaps, then the way that Donald Trump and the Trump campaign is talking about is doing it more to kind of a decentralized monetary kind of meme stock crypto crowd. And that's one way of getting more votes.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.